It's the week ending Friday the 21st of June, and this is the Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un meeting up in North Korea for a series of military photo opportunities, Italian PM Giorgia Meloni hosting world leaders at the G7 summit in Bari, and actor and singer Justin Timberlake being arrested for drunk driving in the Hamptons. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in the Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Ollie Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the Week's digital team is Jamie Timpson and Rebecca Evans. And from Syria, via London, sometimes Turkey, now in Hong Kong, it's refugee podcaster turned lecturer Abdul Wahab Tahan. We're recording this on Thursday, early afternoon, so England have yet to play their match against Denmark. So just for fun, for those of you listening, as you're listening now, who know what happened, some score predictions. Jamie?
2-1 to England.
Rebecca?
3-1 to England.
Woo! Abdul?
It's a master class, 4-0.
Okay. I'm laughing in advance. Let's see who's right. Rebecca, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Will France show the red card to extremism or just play on?
We see today that the extremists are at the gates of power. We have the opportunity to choose the future of our country. That's why I call upon the youth to go out and vote, to really be aware of the importance of this situation. I hope to use my voice as best I can, because you need to be able to identify with your country.
If he's going to use his voice that much, he also needs to find a dubbing artist who sounds French. But you heard there a press conference in the lead up to France versus Austria on Tuesday. Who was it actually talking, Rebecca, and why is this your story this week?
Well, this week, footballer Kylian Mbappe, who is a Real Madrid player and the French captain, used a pre-game speech to call upon French people to reject the extremes that he claims are knocking at the gates of power in France. Now, he might have been talking about both far-left and far-right parties, but many have taken him to mean a rejection of the far-right National Rally Party, currently headed by Marine Le Pen, due to their successes in the recent European elections. So that's led many people to question whether Mbappe made the right intervention and really whether footballers and athletes should be talking about politics at all.
Yeah, because what he said is part of a bigger cohort of French athletes as well, isn't it?
Well, yeah, exactly. More than 200 French sports personalities have now signed an open letter specifically calling on voters to reject the far right. They said in doing so, we would show an act of love for our country. So they're being very open about their rejection of far-right politics within France.
But, Jamie, there they are, wearing the national shirt, standing in front of the national flag at the Euro tournament. Where do you stand on footballers in that position making political statements?
I'm quite for it, really. It's quite refreshing if you compare it to the times where England footballers have struggled to know what day of the week it is, let alone what's going on in terms of the EU referendum. I remember a good example with Harry Kane being asked about it the next day after the EU referendum during Euro 2016, and he responded kind of fairly blandly that they were kind of concentrating on the football, but obviously had been aware that the referendum had taken place. I think it's fair enough. Didier Deschamps, who's the coach of France, has come out and said that he has no problem with it as they're French citizens and that it's obviously affecting them. I think the question is whether or not it will have a massive impact on the kind of younger voters and whether they'll come out because someone like Kylian Mbappe or Marcus Thuram, who was the other one that made a claim as well. Obviously, we'll wait and see, but it'd be interesting to try and get to the bottom of whether younger voters are swayed by people like Kylian Mbappe.
I suppose the point is, though, Abdul, on a world stage, it's not a level playing field, is it? Some athletes in some countries have a lot more freedom to speak out.
Well, exactly, and this is very subjective. So that's why I don't really like it. For example, in the World Cup in 2018, Xhaka and Shaqiri, who play for Switzerland, received a warning and a fine of $10,000 for sporting a behavior that was deemed by FIFA as unfriendly. What was the behavior? Well, they put their hands together to form what looked like a double-headed eagle, similar to the one on Albanian flag, because they were from Albanian heritage and they were raised in Switzerland. So that was deemed unacceptable. An Egyptian judoka in 2016 in the Olympics in Rio was also punished by the IOC for refusing to shake hands with an Israeli athlete. But when a Ukrainian tennis player who won against a Russian player in Rome, in Italy last year, and refused to shake hands, that was not deemed unfriendly. That was not deemed unruly behavior. And that was okay. And she continued, didn't receive any warning about it. And that was, a lot of people thought that it was patriotic. Now, I understand all of these, but you need to be consistent. Are athletes allowed to express opinions, political opinions, or not? Regardless of what you think is right or wrong. We're not the police to tell them this is right, this is wrong. You can support the right wing or you cannot support the left wing. It's not up to us.
But even just the inclusion of certain teams is seen as a political movement sometimes, isn't it, Abdul? I'm thinking back all the way to, South Africa being banned from the Olympics in the 1960s because of apartheid, to Russia and Ukraine now and their stances in international tournaments. There is politics deeply ingrained regardless of whether the actual players want to make a political statement.
There is a politics, and it's not only on individuals level, but it's on a bigger level. For example, during the World Cup 2018, it was held in Russia. Russia started a war campaign in Syria in 2014. They bombed my city, Aleppo, where I was from. And during the World Cup, they were bombing Syria, and people were getting killed. And everyone was in Russia and saying, oh, this is a fantastic World Cup. Even the BBC commentators were there saying, oh, we are in Belgrade. This is a beautiful city. Yeah. So there's a lot of hypocrisy in here. What we'd like to see is a little bit more consistency. Free speech is great. Let it be consistent with that.
What's the reaction been in France, Rebecca?
Well, I think it's been kind of split, really. Some people are obviously supporting a sportsperson's rights to suggest that there be political engagement regardless of what side of the political spectrum you fall on. But predictably, National Rally politicians have not been best pleased. National Rally politicians have accused Mbappe of being out of touch and disconnected with the realities that normal everyday French people are facing due to his obviously immense wealth. So I think just like there's a split in politics in France, there's definitely a split in opinion on how Mbappe has reacted to this.
There's also, I imagine, Jamie, going to be a different reaction on social media and amongst Gen Z in particular based on the politics being expressed. I mean, I do wonder, if a bunch of football players had come out in support of the far right, how that would have gone down with some of the people that are defending this.
Yeah, and I think there's a kind of probably, certainly when you look at the way that the support for Marine Le Pen and the far right candidates in France come from generally white working class unemployed voters. Are they the ones that are getting so worked up about it on social media? I think you're probably right. I think what's also interesting is that there is quite a lot to do with how much success the French football team will have. France is obviously at a point in time where they are one of the best teams in the world, and there is a feeling, and that happens in England all the time as well. You only have to look at the reaction to the black players that missed penalties at the end of the Euro 2021 to see that it's very easy for football fans to turn on their own players, and particularly those of ethnic minority, when things aren't going their way. And French football has had an incredible number of really brilliant players that have come from immigrant parents. Certainly 4 of the 5 French winners of the Ballon d'Or, which is the pinnacle of football, came from what you would describe as non-French backgrounds. People like Michel Platini, who's of Italian origin, Zinedine Zidane and Karim Benzema are both Algerian. So immigration has played a massive role in France, as we know, but also in the success of French football.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's it, though, isn't it, Abdul? If you're in that position, if you're black or mixed race and you are the national team captain and you've got an opportunity then, before you flunked out of the Euros, but at a time when everyone's looking at you as a symbol of your country, to say something about the political situation that is happening. I mean, this may have even been part of Macron's calculation, is that, France is being represented by this more diverse group at the Euros at the very time he's called an election. Maybe you just feel a responsibility to say something.
Well, that could be a reason, but after all, a lot of these athletes have an image to care about and sell. For example, Michael Jordan, back when he was playing basketball, and when he was pushed to back a progressive black Democratic senator in North Carolina against a Republican incumbent, Michael Jordan declined, and he famously said, Republicans buy sneakers too. And he said that because he wanted everyone to buy his sneakers, and he wanted everyone, to be united on and make a lot of money from them. So,
well, he was a corporate mascot, wasn't he, as well as just a mascot for the country? I mean, that's the problem there.
It's true, but again, if you want the whole country to back you up, then again, you represent everyone. You represent the far right, the far left. And the far right, just as a matter of a fact, that the far right, yes, they got a lot of seats in the elections, but they won it in a democratic process. These extremists did not come, by force or a military coup. They won in a democratic race. So a lot of people, French people, would look at it and say, "Why is this guy?" Even though he didn't say the French extremist, like a lot of people would doubt his intentions.
Rebecca, you're slightly screwing up your face.
I don't know. I do see with that point. I feel like Mbappe has been quite, I don't know whether brave is the right word, but he is a man of black heritage in France at a time where there's lots of, fractious goings on about who deserves in quotes to be in the country and what the country's stance is on immigration. I think he was really clear and measured. His words appeared really thought out. Obviously, as we're talking about before, sponsorships and deals might be at risk for sports people who speak up, but I don't think he's particularly said anything majorly controversial. He wasn't just saying the extremes are knocking at the gates of power. He did say that everyone should express the right to go out and vote, which I think is probably more of an important message than anything else. I think people make their own political opinions, and sure, he could mobilise young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, but I think that the key message is to get out and vote, because that's the only way that people are going to have their say, regardless of what political party they support.
It's probably worth touching on the man who is driving this rise in popularity of the far right in France at the moment, Jordan Bardella.
Yeah, I mean, he's like president of the far right national rally. He's quite an enigmatic figure. He's definitely a protege, but he's also kind of ridiculously young, just 28. Where the current president is 46 and the prime minister is 35. The key thing about him is that he's incredibly presentable, and he's kind of nicely hidden some of his deeper views. And you would assume, being on the party that he has quite strong views about certainly about immigration and certainly about the direction that France is going. But he's kept that held back, and I think that's about kind of the packaging up of the right wing and the moves that Marine Le Pen has made over. We've talked about on this podcast many times about the way that they have tried to make far right politics appealing to a greater number of people, and we see it in the UK as well. I would just say about the football, I can't move away from this fact that it is refreshing to hear footballers talk about things that matter to the country. I can't imagine the likes of Harry Kane or Jordan Pickford or coming forward and even saying get out and vote. I think it would be a shock for them to come out and say this stuff. So I have a feeling that I'm fairly refreshed by the whole discussion. And
have you moved your position, Abdul? You don't look refreshed.
No, not really. I listened to Jamie, and I see his point, and and I wish, and this is the point, that I was born and raised in Britain to feel proud about our team and England, because I look back at Syrian athletes for football, and they support Assad publicly, and in every tournament, they wear T-shirts with his photo as if it's North Korea or any dictatorship. So, and I feel disgusted seeing these people who represent my country support this regime. So maybe that was the reason I'm a little bit skeptical about footballers expressing political opinions. But I see Jamie's point, and he's right. And as I said, I wish I was born and raised in England for this reason.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose to an extent it's maybe about talking to a younger demographic, Rebecca, than politics normally does. But then, as I said, and as you said, Bardella himself is young.
Well, exactly. And I mean, as Jamie touched upon, Bardella has been able to craft this image for himself as sort of a hunky TikTok star. He's jostled by crowds. He's beset by teenagers who are asking for a selfie. It seems like he's cut through to a restless generation that other politicians have been unable to reach so far.
And he's Italian, so he can't be anti-immigrant, right?
Well, I suppose his politics is complicated in that sense, given his background. But ultimately, that's what's gaining him popularity, is the fact that young people are restless in France. They are fed up with the status quo. They want something different. And while we can debate how true this is and whether hard right politics is actually the way to achieve a positive difference within the country, Bardella's appeal can't be denied.
Yeah, I mean, how likely do you think actually it is that the far right are going to get a strong foothold in France at this election?
It's difficult to say. I think, there's a lot of polls and a lot of, news articles written about the far right, and it can be easy to kind of exacerbate the political issues that are going on within the country. Yes, there is obviously some appeal. Whether that is directly related to Jordan Bardella or not remains to be seen. But there has been a slide towards the far right across Europe, not just in France. So I think it will be interesting to see how it all plays out, particularly with such a speedy snap election.
Worth pointing out, obviously, that Mbappe is a forward, so he's neither left nor right. Still to come, we'll be talking about doom scrolling and your children. But first, it's Jamie's turn after this. Okay, Jamie, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week, I finally have proof that people have stopped listening to me.
But, I mean, they were the ones in my group, and I'm talking like real tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists, don't trust anything. And they were the ones that were, for years now have been saying everything on the news is not just bad news, but it's all fake, it's all paid, it's right. It's all stuff that's used to kind of, try to move the masses and make people angry, and then they hit you with an ad for anxiety because, of course, you're all anxious because of what you just saw.
People are getting burnt out by the news. A video from the Klein Alley show on 106.7 K-Rock on Wednesday. Thank you, Jamie, for the opportunity to say an American radio station's name. I always enjoy that. Are people getting news burnout? That's bad news for us, if so.
Yes, well, but they won't be listening to this, will they? So at least we can. we've got a trapped audience here. Yes, it's a new report by the Oxford University's Reuters Institute that came out this week, which said that almost 4 in 10, so that's 39% of people worldwide, said they sometimes or often actively avoid the news. This was compared with 29% in 2017. In the UK, those saying that they were extremely or very interested in the news in 2015 was at 70%, but that's now fallen to 38% this year, which is basically almost half in total. So, I mean, anecdotally, and indeed I am, as someone that's in control of the week's UK news output, I have noticed that people are less bothered about the news. I mean, it's kind of all of the obvious things that you would think about. It is depressing. What can be done about it? How can it affect individuals? And it's so much easier these days to just not engage with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can all sort of identify with that feeling sometimes, Abdul. I'm not going to watch the news today because I just can't face it today. I don't want to see those images right now. But obviously, as a long-term trend, this is quite worrying, isn't it? Not just, for a room full of journalists thinking about livelihoods, but for everyone and their access to what is happening in the world.
Yeah, totally. And the data shows that over a third of people worldwide are actively avoiding news, and especially because of a couple of things that are being showed on the news a lot. For example, the war in Ukraine or the cost of living crisis. These suggest a growing awareness of impact of news consumption on mental health well-being, and how taxing that is emotionally. And, if you talk to a psychologist and you tell them there's something that you're reading a lot and it's worrying you, they will tell you to stop reading it. But, avoiding the news a lot creates a distrust and a decline in what's happening in the country, and creates a place for fake news to be circulated around, especially now with social media. If you're not following a lot of what's happening online, then you get a text from your uncle or aunt who's like, I don't know, 40s, 50s, and they send you something that, about a politician that never said it. It's obviously deep fake. So if you're not following the news, then this is going to lead to kind of a distrust of the political discourse in the country, I guess.
Yeah, and increasingly, Rebecca, younger people in particular are getting their news through social media.
Well, yeah, exactly. The report found that audiences for traditional sources of media like TV and print has rapidly declined, and young people are preferring to get their news online or via social media. TikTok is particularly on the rise. It's overtaken Twitter for the first time, with 13% of respondents using TikTok for news compared with 10% who use Twitter. There's a changing shape of how we interact with the news, if we're interacting with it at all, as this story is obviously touching upon. News outlets will have to kind of bear that in mind when it comes to the content that they put out.
Not to mention, Jamie, that TikTok is a company regulated by the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, it's funny, isn't it? You know, all along they were saying, TikTok's for sharing videos with your friends, it's for silly dancing, it's for cookery. No, more people are getting their news from that than Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a fair amount of hand-wringing going on about
You can't
this.
see my hands.
That I think, a lot of the success that publishers have had engaging with TikTok has been allowed, and it's not like it's being censored. A good example is Le Monde in France, have had quite a lot of success by hiring teams of young journalists who understand kind of the language of TikTok and other emerging platforms and produce like engaging and fun news that means that it's going out to like millions of people. So there is a way to do it. And I think I can see a way in which we say, it weren't the old days better? And actually, the thing is, what we need is more print and more broadcast, but actually changing our output as journalists, understanding that people do need sometimes uplifting and positive news. And that isn't sensationalizing it. That isn't kind of creating stuff that isn't hard hitting or important, but by actually structuring it in the way that you structure news to engage with younger people or engage with people that might be avoiding it. A lot of the time it's about showing people what they can do rather than making them feel helpless, explaining why this is important to them, but then also giving them an opportunity to feel like there is a way out of it.
Yeah, I'm sure there is serious news coverage on TikTok, but Abdul, you don't know who's seeing it. More importantly, you don't know what isn't being shown to people.
Unfortunately, where I live in Hong Kong, and we don't have TikTok in Hong Kong. We have Douyin, which is the Chinese version of TikTok. What we see in here, for example, is there are a lot of regulations. There are so many things that you will not be able to talk about or say or, show. So there's a lot of more regulation actually in China and what people can see. And a lot of these things are regulated by people because they know once you say the wrong things, that's it, you're gone. But in other places around the world, you can say pretty much whatever you want.
Well, if it's getting selected by the algorithm to be shown to people, I mean, that's what I'm getting at, isn't it? Like, we don't know. We don't have visibility to how that works. I mean, you literally don't where you are, but also in the UK, I don't know what I'm not being shown.
But you can go on to Le Monde's, page or the BBC's page, or if you want to search out news and you want to find this like engaging, fun content. Yes, the algorithm, obviously the For You pages is important, but you can also go and search out yourself if you would like.
Do you relate, Rebecca, to this idea? I mean, I know this is slightly a conflict of interest given your job, but do you relate to this idea that it might be good for us to watch a bit less news?
I mean, I've often despised the notion of, it's the news, it's all doom and gloom, why do you even bother? But I think working on some of these stories and digesting the news every day as part of my job, I do understand the idea of news fatigue. I am sympathetic towards it. I think even if journalists can get burnt out by this type of thing, what is to say that the normal non-journalist person isn't feeling the same way? So this is why I think it's so important that journalists take all of these things on board and morph content to suit readers' needs to a certain extent. As Jamie mentioned, finding these human stories that are powerful and relatable and sometimes funny. I think they're just as important as the hard-hitting pieces, the investigative journalism, for example, that we often give more kudos to. I think listening to what readers want and adapting to a certain extent is the only way to help people stay engaged with the news and not feel downtrodden and depressed by it.
Well, that might be better for your bottom line. It might keep more people engaged, Jamie. But is it then delivering the news? Is it journalism?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always an argument about how truthful you are to this idea of journalism. But if you look at, say...
Or how trivial you allow the product to become. I guess that's the issue, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think if you look at something like the FT, which you wouldn't describe as trivial in terms of...
well, I don't know. It depends if you're reading Robert Shrimsley.
But if you're reading the how to spend it bit, or the real estate bit, or the style bit, that would all be described as trivial and also marketed at very high value wealth people. That's not appealing to the masses, is it? So I think journalism and the people working in the news industry do have the ability to provide both what you would say quote unquote trivial and real news, and it's just about working out how you kind of meld those two together and produce a content that does tick all the boxes. I think the other thing is, for a group of people that are very good with words, journalists and the industry aren't very good at communicating why the news is important. And I really do feel like the news has a social benefit and offers real value to people, but we don't, as journalists, really explain and advertise this at all. And part of that is about teaching in schools and media literacy and where sources come from and all of that stuff. But part of it is also being like, actually, if we want people to read it, we have to explain the benefits of what we're producing.
Yeah, but it's not just about trust in brands, is it, Abdul? There's also trust in individuals on social media. And one of the advantages of getting your news from other places is you can verify the source as an individual, as a person, and see where they're coming from, which is something you couldn't do before.
No, but this is a new model. Like on social media, we were able, in my previous show, we were able to verify where airstrikes took place, for example, in Syria. And we would get names of the people who were killed, footage of the people who were killed, and then we would communicate with the Central Command in the US, and we told them, hey, you carried an airstrike here, and you did this. They didn't even know about these things. So the United States Central Command started communicating with us. Okay, can you help us get this info and this info and this info? And all of this was happening on the ground in real life because there are people on the ground using Twitter and Facebook in order to provide this information. So now there's a lot of content that is not really regulated by news medias, but by people. And a lot of their content is designed specifically for people following them. And their followers feel that they're getting a little bit more value than what they get on 10 things you should do before you're, 40 on BBC or something. I don't know if BBC does something like this, but...
Yeah, BBC News Magazine run an article like that, and I'd probably click it. But I suppose the thing is, I wouldn't think about that as news, Rebecca. I think people still know where to go when they want the news, don't they? And that's still important.
To a certain extent, I think people know where the news is. Perhaps that's less true in a younger demographic that have been raised on social media being such an integral part of their lives. Perhaps they are not as aware as slightly older people who are used to kind of the traditional news sources like the BBC and The Week. But there may be some people who are not as aware, and as Jamie touched upon, that's about media literacy and helping people to have accurate, trustworthy and easily accessible news.
I do wonder, Jamie, what traditional broadcasters should do about this. I mean, I suppose, you see, don't you, for example, like Global put out the News Agents, don't they, as a news podcast? And that's obviously more palatable to a lot of their audience than LBC is, even though it's owned by the same company. Should ITV News look a bit more like that as well? There's still that slightly kind of day-to-day, pile of newspapers, serious woman in a business suit talking to you type vibe, which is maybe just a bit out of date.
Yeah, and I think turns people off as well. I think some of the success of someone like Ross Atkins doing these like 7-minute explainer videos, they were massive on across social media, and the thing that he was very good at was basically explaining why this mattered to people, and I think that was a BBC initiative. So I think there is scope for a BBC, and I think like the new BBC Verify unit is very important, which kind of combats disinformation by looking at stuff that Abdul was talking about, open source intelligence and things like that. And I think there is scope for the BBC to move away. I think the key thing is that we can't listen to this and not change our output because of it. Because if 40% of the kind of world is actively avoiding the stuff that we do, as journalists, we have to say, well, the product that we're producing isn't working.
A not entirely unrelated story from Abdul coming up next after this. Okay, Abdul, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is it time for a warning filter?
Oh, hey!
Hey, Rachel. We're just here to ask you a few questions about social media.
Well, shoot, let's do it. Come along.
What would you say is the latest with hashtags?
Oh, everything is changing because the social media platforms are starting to take into account your captions and even the words that you use in your videos. So while hashtags are important, they're not as important as they used to be.
So what do you do after you go viral?
After you go viral, the most important thing is to keep posting content.
So then what do you do with all of the haters' comments? Do they hurt?
It definitely hurts. I'm human. But the truth is it fuels me to create better and be kinder in this ugly world.
9 Questions with Rachel Pedersen, a video from TikToker Mrs. Pedersen on Saturday. Abdul, what's the story this week?
So this week, Dr. Vivek Murthy, the US Surgeon General, has proposed that social media platforms should carry warning labels about their potential mental health harms to adolescents, similar to cigarette warnings.
Okay, so how would these warning messages work then? I mean, on a packet of cigarettes, it's quite clear because that's a physical product. But I mean, where do you put the warning on Facebook?
You're absolutely right. The surgeon wants the company, social media companies, to figure out some sort of warnings and work with parents and work with others in order to put warnings and increase the awareness of people that there is mental health issues concerning use of social media or addiction to social media.
I suppose the difference with smoking and alcohol is that those definitely are damaging to minors. Of course, social media definitely is too, but it's hard to say at what quantity. A small exposure to it or exposure to the right kind of material that would help someone can have a positive effect on a young person.
Well, there is. So there are a number of studies in 2019 and 2021, and they highlighted the concern link between problematic social media use, particularly image-based platform, and mental health issues such as body dissatisfaction, low self-esteem, and depression among adolescents and young adults. A study at university in the United States, where they analyzed data from 260 college students with the average age of 20, found out that the increased daily hours spent on TikTok were linked to poor body image, higher depression levels, and shared content anxiety. And this is very bad if you're young and you have access to a smartphone.
I suppose, a lot of this stuff is pretty well known, Jamie. What's different is that this is America's Surgeon General talking about it.
Yeah, and it's a kind of massive, or certainly if you go on some of the kind of American media sites, this is the time where people are really, it feels like, engaging on it. There was a really interesting article in The Atlantic basically asking, what would it look like? Would it be like a persistent pop-up that you have to click out of every time you want to open an app? Or would it be there forever, or when a person is creating an account? And the links, like you say, because it's the Surgeon General, like the links to alcohol and tobacco, and they're saying, this is having a similar effect on young people. I think the worry, and the Surgeon Murphy mentions this, is that does it kind of get the social media giants off the hook? Like, are they then able to continue to produce an app that affects young people in this way as long as they slap a warning sign on it? And I guess that is a worry, and they would have to work, with the government. To be honest, I have a kind of feeling of like, again, here's another link to earlier, of there is a bit of hand-wringing about this. And obviously when we're looking at mental health problems with adolescents, and, studies have shown that there are, more mental health problems with adolescents, there is a worry that, what's the new thing in their life? Like, what's the new thing that's causing this? Is it, the phone that they have? Is it the social media that they have? But I do think, like, taking a step back and really assessing, whether or not adolescents are always going to have problems. We're not going to be able to ban phones. We're not going to be able to ban social media, really. They'll always find a way to use it if they want to. Whether or not you need to kind of take a step back and take a holistic look and be like, right, so how do we work with teenagers? How do we work with young people so that they understand more what they're accessing and what they're doing? And maybe a warning label will help with this, but I think there is a tendency to be like, right, well, we never had Instagram when I was 14, and look at me, I'm fine. And I think we need to avoid that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The reaction from a lot of Trumpish Republicans, Rebecca, that I've seen online is along the lines of, we don't need nanny state getting involved to tell us what's right and what's wrong for our children. But in a strange way, actually, if you just slap a label on it, then that's probably a pathway to less government regulation, because everyone knows something has to happen. Like, if that's all that happens, it's not very much.
Yeah, I mean, when this story was presented, what immediately sprung to mind was that this would be a particular issue in the US because of the way that they view the First Amendment and the right to freedom of speech. I think that's something that is often a thread that runs through American society. And so even though private companies aren't bound by the First Amendment in the same way as the government is, for example, I think there's still an inherent expectation Americans have around free speech. And I think in that sense, bringing warning labels onto social media, I might not agree with this. I can see the viewpoint that some might argue that it's a form of censorship or stifling open discourse. So politically, obviously, it will be very interesting to see how this develops with the election in November and what side of the aisle is handed the keys to the White House. And obviously, that will impact the laws and legislations that might come into place going forward.
I mean, do you think, Abdul, that this is just an inevitable kind of street that's heading towards a world where children are online all the time and they become more and more addicted? Or is there still the possibility to look at what's happened over the last 10 years and say, actually, we need to do something about this?
Well, there are a couple of things that we should address here, that parents should do something called parenting. Data from Ofcom shows that a quarter of 3 and 4-year-old in the UK now own a smartphone. How can a 3-year-old or 4-year-old own a smartphone is beyond me. How can they afford it? So it's given to them by their parents. And again, they need to do some parenting. So this one thing, it shows that half of the children under 13 are on social media. Okay, this is something social media can address, right? Ron DeSantis, speaking of the U.S., Ron DeSantis signed a legislation forcing social media companies to have parental approval for those aged 14 and 15 to start a social media account. This only happened in Florida. It's now being discussed in other states as well. But here in the UK, we have a problem with parenting. So I think they need to be accountable for that.
Do you agree, Jamie?
Yeah, I think there does need to be a change in parenting. I think that we also have to be aware of the message that we're giving teenagers. So many things at the moment are talking about how today's teenagers are a lost generation, a kind of uniquely doomed group of people. And they're going to hear that. Like, they're going to hear that from, if they're hearing it from their parents, if they're hearing it from the news. And that's going to, if we tell them that they're anxious and that they're addicted and that they're all of these things, they're going to be like, well, this is who we are. Having that understanding that this period in their life is massive, and it's a massive social change, and it does throw you into a context where what you want it to spend, you go from wanting to spend all of your time with your parents to wanting to spend all of your time with your friends, and then you're given something like a mobile phone that allows you to spend all of your time with your friends. I think we have to be aware as adults and potentially as parents that this isn't going to change. And yes, parenting is probably a good way of talking about it, but actually just understanding that young people are in a difficult situation in that period of time between 12 and 18. And so telling them that they are doomed and slave to their phones and all of that stuff, it's only going to go one way.
I mean, it would be possible with regulation to stop children accessing social media, Rebecca. Jamie's saying it's not going to change. It could. I mean, if the social media companies all agreed that you do genuinely have to be over 14 before you can register, they could just take everyone's passport when you sign up. I mean, that's possible.
I suppose it is possible. I don't see it becoming a thing. I just don't feel like social media companies would get on board with that.
Well, they wouldn't do it by themselves, would they? That's why I said regulation. But I mean, government could enforce that.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think the point of comparison there is the Online Safety Act in this country that is hot off the press, putting a range of new duties on social media companies and search engines to make them more responsible for their users' safety. And I think it has to be a holistic approach. We can't just look at warning labels. We can't just look at parents' responsibilities. We can't just look at, teens will be teens. We've got to consider all of these things together.
I mean, Abdul, as an educator yourself, people in Britain look over to where you are in Hong Kong and countries like that and say, look at this generation of teenagers who are so familiar with technology. We need to invest in STEM subjects. We need the next generation of computer programmers to come out of our schools. These very same people say things like, keep phones away from children. They are the root of all evil and they mustn't learn how to use them. How do you square that circle?
Well, to be honest with you, I struggle because, when I go to class, a lot of my students are using phone. And I understand my class is boring, but it's not as boring as math, And then I gave them a challenge. I said, okay, let's see this challenge where they can type without looking at the keyboard, You guys are Gen Z, or you spend all your time on screens. I could write around 60 words a minute, type, without looking at my keyboard. And the fastest of them was like 35 words. And I was like, you guys are 21 years old. When we compared screen time, my screen time is like 4 hours a day. Their screen time, some of them, is like 11 hours a day. And that is a problem, because what they do is not what we would like students to do. Of course, students need to go out and have fun and sometimes study. But what they do is that they pretty much, a lot of them, not all of them, of course, just, get hooked to phones. So what can be done? A number of schools, for example, in England, are offering a dumb phone for parents to give to their kids for free or for a very low price. So this could be one of the solutions. Schools banning smartphones during class time is another thing. And a couple of schools are, doing this at the moment. But I don't know how well will that sit with students.
Yeah, well, of course, as we all know, the least damaging thing you can do with your phone is follow this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. So do that now. Just search for The Week Unwrapped. You can also, of course, with that phone, get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription if you go to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. And then if you only want to read the paper magazine, you can. That's your choice. In the meantime, my thanks to Jamie, Rebecca and Abdul. I've been Ollie Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby. The producer, Ollie Peart at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.